So the New York Giants playoff run is over. The Eagles absolutely obliterated the Giants 38-7 in a game on paper that wasn't even close to begin with. The Eagles had a top 5 team on pretty much every side of the ball. Defense and offense, it was a complete wipe roster and talent wise. This game proved that even though they made the playoffs, they fought through so much adversity. They still have some big deficiencies on their roster and they need to be fixed ASAP. Daboll and Joe Shane, they inherited a team that was pretty much bottom 5 to begin with, and they led them to the playoffs. But it was only a matter of time before they ran into a team who was pretty much going to demolish them and had a way better roster than them, and it happened to be the Eagles. This might be one of the biggest off seasons for the Giants in a while. After making the playoffs, they finally have something to build on. And usually when teams make the playoffs, they're going to have more people wanting to play for them, especially when they have coaches like Brian Daboll, Mike Kaplan, and Wink Martindale as their coaches. With that happening, the Giants are now going to be a top destination, at least as far as we know, for a lot of free agents coming up. How this team performed based on all the deficiencies for their team. Here's how I think the Giants should go about and approach this offseason. But before I go any further in this video, if you haven't yet, go ahead and like the video, comment, subscribe, tap the bell icon. I don't only do videos on the Giants, we do basketball videos, we do football videos of any kind. If you like any of that, go ahead and subscribe and tap that bell icon for future videos. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Giants are going to have to do a lot of possible contract extensions this offseason. Dexter Lawrence, Daniel Jones, and Saquon Barkley are a few of the top guys that are up for extensions this season. Thomas is another guy, but with his 5th-year option, the Giants are probably going to have another season to decide what they want to do and what they want to pay him. So I'm not going to talk about him for the most part in this video. Starting with Daniel Jones, it was a make or break year for him. If he did not do well enough for the coaching staff, he was not going to be back with this team or get an extension, or at least not even be talked about for an extension. For him though, even though it wasn't special, it wasn't anything outstanding, he played well enough to buy himself an extension for the Giants. Obviously, it's not something that I'm sold on. I'm not going to say he's a franchise QB, but I still want to see more out of him. I want to see more when this Giants team staff fixed his receiving core. I want to see how he performs, but for the most part, he did well enough to, like I said, warrant him an extension. Now, on average, quarterbacks tend to make around $32 million per year, and I don't think he's going to get, $32 million, obviously. In my opinion, I'd say he earned himself around $25 million contract in maybe 2 to 3 years, a 2-3 year deal. It's not a huge contract, obviously, but I think it's just right for Daniel Jones. I've seen some people on Twitter saying pay him around $100 million, and I don't think he's deserved anywhere near that. It's not a knock on Daniel Jones, but that's kind of disrespectful to a lot of QBs who are way better than Daniel Jones and are not getting paid anywhere near as much as that. I think anything more than $30 million is a huge overpay for Daniel Jones. Now with Saquon, it becomes a little bit more easier. The saying goes, you never overpay for a running back under any circumstances, but Saquon, it is without a doubt, he has earned himself a new deal with this team with the season he's had. And I think he's earned himself a decent contract with some decent money. It's hard to say what kind of deal you offer him. I think there is a chance the Giants could tag him and give another season to figure out what they want to do. Considering Christian McCaffrey is getting paid $16 million per year, I'd say the Giants should offer him around $13 to $14 million per year. I'd say that's the right amount of money to pay him. Now, that is not an overpay in my opinion, considering the fact that is what most top 10 running backs are getting paid. But I think anything more than $16 million is a no-go for me. You just let him walk or tag him and decide what you want to do, or even trade him. I love Saquon Barkley, but at the same time, I'm just not a huge fan of overpaying for running backs. We've seen how it's worked out in the past, like for Todd Gurley and a few other guys. I'm just not a fan of it. For Dexter Lawrence, he made a Pro Bowl and he was an All-Pro this year, so obviously he's going to get big-time money, no doubt. The Giants, they've allowed too many interior defensive linemen to walk in the pass. They did it with Dalvin Tomlinson a couple years ago, not so long ago, and they did with Linval Joseph a couple years ago as well. Unlike with Daniel Jones, they did execute Lawrence's 5th-year option, so they will probably get a while to decide what they want to do. They could wait until next season, or they could go ahead and get it over with this season, which I believe they will. For him, I think he's fully earned himself a $50 million deal a 4-year contract. Some websites project he's going to get around 80 million with 60 million guaranteed. That's not bad for him considering the big strides he made this season for this team. Consider the fact that interior defensive linemen, especially like Lawrence, don't come often. You need to lock up Dexy for as long as possible for the future because I think he's going to be a consistent Pro Bowler and a consistent All-Pro at least a few more times in the next few seasons. Like I said, guys like that simply just don't come out of the blue. They just don't fall out of the sky. You actually have to find these guys and find them good. Like I said, but Andrew Thomas, I'm not going to talk about him too much. I think the Giants, there's a slight chance they could get into his new contract over this offseason, but I do think they'll wait until 2024 to figure that out. You guys that could possibly have their contracts restructured and possibly cut altogether. Kenny Golladay will most definitely, without a doubt, be cut from the Giants. The Giants have made it clear they have no future plans for him on this team, and he's not a fit for this offense any longer. He's just pretty much a waste of space at this point. He's not getting playing time. It seems like he's fell out of love with these coaches. It just seems like the Giants and his staff want nothing to do with him whatsoever. It's unfortunate and it's sad it didn't work out, but that's just how it has to be. Cunningham will release about $6.7 million in cap space, so while it's not a lot, it's some much needed money the Giants could use. Dory Jackson was another guy who was listed as a possible cut candidate. Releasing him will release about $9 million in cap space, but personally, I think you keep with Dory. He is still a very good corner. His speed is definitely a need for this team. If you put another corner one who's probably better than him or a little bit better than him, or corner two who's good, solid, I think the secondary makes a solid improvement. And I think Dory Jackson is a guy you need on this team come next year. Leonard Williams is a guy who I have mixed opinions on. Personally, when the Giants gave him that contract a couple years ago, I was not a fan of it. I thought it was a huge overpay. Somewhat, I still do think it's a huge overpay. Now, I think it's a solid player, but this guy's a $32 million cap hit that needs to be addressed ASAP. Williams has said in an interview he is willing to take a pay cut. If he stays true to that, so be it. He needs to take that pay cut because that $32 million cap hit is going to hurt us, and it's going to hurt us badly. Really, aside from that, I think Leonard Williams is probably the only guy who is probably going to be up for a restructure this season. We move on to the juicy part of the offseason, roster needs, which means free agency and the draft. Giants guard position has been in limbo for way too long. The left guard and right guard position have been in limbo. We went from Ben Bredesen to Joshua Ezeudu to Shane Lemieux and Nick Gates, and neither of them have been an option for this team that is going to be a long-term option. I think Ben Bredesen was terrible, but like I said, I don't see him as a long-term option for this team whatsoever. So they desperately need to fix both of these positions, both sides of these positions, come off season. I didn't even mention the right guard position because Mark Glowinski was not good either for this team. Draft-wise, guys like Jackson Kirkland, Osiris Torrance, Andrew Voorhees, and the guard from Alabama, I think his name starts with E. I don't want to try to pronounce it because I know I'm going to botch it. A couple of good guards maybe you could throw in there. Ben Powers, who was an outstanding pass blocker for the Ravens this season. Isaac Samalo was also an outstanding pass blocker for the Eagles. So I think those are better upgrades than what we have now, obviously. Centers, I didn't forget John Feliciano. I think he's been one of my biggest guys I have not liked all this season for this Giants offensive line. He's not a long-term option. Evan Brown, Garrett Bradbury, and Ethan Pocic are a few of my top 3 guys at the center position who could easily step in and become an easy upgrade over John Feliciano. Feliciano has been nothing but a drive killer for the Giants. If we get a big play, he'll get a penalty, and he'll absolutely ruin the drive. I think he was always a bridge player to begin with, so I don't think he'll be back with this team. Linebacker position might have been worse than almost anything on this team. Tay Crowder, Micah McFadden, Jalen Smith were all not great options at linebacker. This is going to take into the account why the Giants had one of the bottom 5 run defenses in the NFL. The linebacker position was an absolute terror to begin with. David Long is probably my top guy at the linebacker position I want to target. He is one of the best run defenders in the league at that linebacker position, as he had an 89.0 PFF grade as a run defender. A few other guys like Tremaine Edmonds, Jermaine Pratt, Bobby Okereke are a few guys the Giants have to consider as well. And honestly, any of those guys who they signed, I would not mind. Like, literally, any of those guys are 100%, without a doubt, a huge upgrade over Micah McFadden, Jalen Smith, and Tay Crowder. Oh, yeah, Tay Crowder's not here anymore, thank God. Corner position is definitely a position where you could look towards the draft. Free agency, not a few names jump to mind. Jamel Dean, I think he will be up with the Buccaneers. Cam Sutton might be back with the Steelers, and Jonathan Jones might be back with the Patriots. So those are not guys that I'm not going to consider that much. Now, Jamel Dean, if he doesn't resign with the Bucks, you need to target him. He was really good with the Bucks for the most part. You guys in the draft who could potentially drop down to the Giants could take, like possibly Keely Ringo, a guy like Joey Porter or Clark Phillips. I don't think you get a guy like probably Cam Smith. You maybe could get Christian Gonzalez, but I think he goes, early top 15, somewhere around that line. But aside from that, I think you can target a guy like Keely Ringo and Joey Porter. I think they could potentially do slide down. And maybe bottom guys like Clark Phillips, Jalen Jones, and Garrett Williams. A few other guys who are really solid at position. I think if anything, Tariq Woolen proved you don't have to be a top 10 prospect or anything like that to make some impact. You can see based on the order I'm going, I think linebacker is the most important position of need right now. Wide receiver is probably number 2. I'm not going in order, but I want to see wide receiver last because that's the position I want to talk about the most. Wide receiver is where the draft is going to play a factor, no doubt. Not a lot of guys in free agency who I look at and say, he could definitely become a wide one. This is definitely a guy we need. Paris Campbell, I think is a solid option this team could sign because I think I like his speed, and he's a really solid option. Jacoby Myers, I know the Patriots, he did good with them, but like I said, I don't see him as a top option as a receiver as well. I said nobody in free agency really stands out to me as he's a solid option. He's a wide receiver 1. The draft comes to mind because there's a lot of guys who can break out into a wide receiver 1 role. Jordan Addison has the potential to be the first wide receiver off the board, so not going to lean into him too much, but if he slides down, the Giants without a doubt should grab him. Jackson Smith-Njigba is another guy who I've been high on. Quentin Johnson, I've been high on him. And Jalen Hyatt, also been high on him. And Josh Downs, Parker Washington, a few guys who you might can get in the later rounds if you don't get one in the first round. I think out of all those guys, Jalen Hyatt is probably the guy who could drop down to the Giants. His speed is something the Giants don't have a lot of. He's going to be able to get a lot of separation with some of these corners he's going against. And I think that's the biggest thing the Giants need, a guy who's really fast and get some separation because they have not had that in a while. Quentin Johnson is also a guy who can do that, and I think that's a guy I also want as well. When it comes to the draft, I think this position is way more deeper than a lot of people realize. So I don't think free agency is necessarily a place where you have to overpay for a guy. When it comes to the receivers who are currently on our team, I think Hodgins is some guy you need to bring back. Slayton is 50-50, but for the right price, you can bring him back as well. I think Shep, considering he's a popular face in the locker room and the coaches love him, I think he will be back on a small deal. If Daniel Jones is ever going to make that jump to becoming any kind of good quarterback, I think the receivers need to be fixed ASAP. Speaking of expiring contracts, I think any guy not named Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, maybe Julian Love, maybe Nick Gates, maybe Sterling Shepard, and maybe Jahan Ward, a few of those guys, they just have good locker room presence. A few of those guys you just kind of need to bring back. I think if those guys who I didn't name, everybody else, you can just let walk. I don't imagine the Giants are going to have to make much changes at the coaching staff. I don't think Mike Kafka will get a coaching job this season. I don't think Whit Martindale will get one, but I think he has the highest chance of getting one out of any of these coaches. If he does get one, I have to imagine Andre Patterson will be the next guy up for defensive coordinator. I think if you do make any changes, maybe move on from Bobby Johnson if you don't like the development of Evan Neal, and maybe Thomas McGahee, considering the fact that special teams have somehow regressed almost every season since he's been here. Like, I respect Thomas McGahee. I think he's a great guy, but at the same time, I do think you can move on from him easily. For the most part, that's how I think the Giants' offseason plan will go for the most part. Like I said, this has the potential to be one of the biggest Giants offseasons in a while and the most intriguing offseasons in a while. The Giants don't have as much money as people think they do, but they're going to have enough money to make some moves. That's the thing. But they're not going to have a lot of money just to throw out like Oprah on one of her talk shows. So obviously they're going to be smart with their money. They're not going to be disastrous with it like Dave Gettleman was. But anyways, that's my offseason plan for the nutshell for the Giants. See, this video is going to be longer than I expected it, and I was not expecting it to be more than 10 minutes. And so far, as far as I know, we've gone over 10 minutes completely. I'm going to wrap the video up here. Like I said, if you haven't yet, I make a lot of videos. I make football, basketball videos. I make a lot of Giants videos, as you can see. So I'm making a lot of content over the off season because I'm going big this season. We're going to hit that 1K mark, and I'm going to go big with it. So yeah. Hopefully see you guys in the next video. If you haven't yet, go ahead and like the video, comment, subscribe, tap that bell icon, and comment what is your personal plan for the Giants for this offseason. I want to see the community's takes on what the Giants should do this offseason. So that's it. Hope you guys have a good week, good day, wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next video. Peace.